Hey everybody, so editing Mike from the future. I just forgot to mention that I am getting over a pretty rough battle with COVID that I had over the last few weeks. I caught the icky on the day the movie came out on August 16th, and I have pretty much been in recovery mode since then. So if I seem a little low energy or tired or anything of the sort, as I sniffle here, that's exactly why. I am just still kind of getting out of it, but I wanted to get this video out as soon as I could. So enjoy all these new little details about what was in Romulus, the early cut, and compared to what is in the theatrical. Hey everyone, welcome back to Mike's Monsters. If you've been following this channel for a while now and keeping up with my Alien Romulus coverage, you'll know that I mentioned about 1,000 times that I had seen the film in a very rough cut early stage of the project. The version I saw was a November 2023 cut, so I was watching a version of the film that almost came out practically a year ago, minus a few months at this point. And it was also, though, it wasn't complete, but it was a watchable film, so I wasn't feeling like I was missing anything in the context of things, or there weren't scenes completely omitted that was like, I don't know what's going on here or anything like that. It was pretty easy to follow, but still missing a lot of the special effects to be finished and such like that. I was able to see this early cut because I was invited along with a marketing team who needed a little extra help with the Alien knowledge. Someone on the team knew that I was a massive fan of the franchise and thought this guy could help us out a little bit. And so I got brought on, nothing paid or anything like that. It was just a fan helping out, and it was just very, very minor things. I didn't do a lot for this at all, but it was one of those things I could not pass up. As a big fan of the franchise, I got to see the film early because of this and interact with some things behind the scenes, but no talking to Fede or anything like that. None of that kind of stuff. But it was a very cool experience getting to see the film for the first time. I got to see it in a few different ways. The first viewing was in December 2023, and it was a very interesting setting, but I only got to see about the first 10 or 15 minutes of the film, maybe 10 minutes, if that. And then the later screenings were in February and March, and these were all in my own home setting. I didn't go to any test screenings or anything like that. I watched it on my TV that is located right here from that couch right there behind me. And it was very fun to do that. The interesting thing, though, is that the video footage, or the file footage or anything like that, was about 480p, so no matter how you watched it, it was not the best quality visually. It was hard to see like details very like specific on like text on screen or anything like that, because it was just kind of blurry and very low resolution. Same with the audio mix. The audio mix was not even close to being done or even touched yet. It was hard to follow things that were being said at times because maybe music was too loud or the volume of the audio hadn't been balanced so we could hear what someone's saying, or it just sounded muffled or at something at times. But I was still able to follow most of the film, and that's what I was able to watch it a few times to pick up on things, because I was able to focus more on like, oh, this is coming up. I have to really pay attention to what's being said, and I was able to get that stuff after like second viewing. And also the music was all temporary as well. There was not, from what I can remember, anything that I heard in the final version of the film in the early version of the film. They used music from all the Alien films, from Alien to Alien Covenant. I heard Prometheus stuff. I thought I heard Covenant stuff. I definitely heard Alien. I heard Bishop's Countdown. I swore I heard stuff from Alien 3, maybe even Resurrection. And then I definitely just like heard like the Prometheus theme played a few times to really set the scene for some moments. But like Bishop's Countdown played during the scene with Rain blasting all the Xenomorphs in zero gravity, if I recall right. It just, again, one of those set the scene kind of moments. But they didn't do it like that in the final film. I thought the soundtrack was fantastic in this final film. I've been listening to it off and on, and I really enjoy it. But the use of all the original tracks was really distracting with all of the callbacks that were already in the movie on top of it. So I was not entirely sure if the movie was going to follow that vibe with the music, and I think it would have taken it down a few more notches if they had just hit play on some of the classic tracks. And I'm glad they went a different route with the music, in my opinion. And yeah, so a lot of the special effects too were very, very rough. There were points where sometimes it was just concept art on the screen, and you just kind of had to imagine what was happening. Like when you're seeing the Renaissance Station for the first time, it was just a kind of a painting. If there was any CG models for some things, it was mostly like if it was the Renaissance Station or the Corbellin, just very rudimentary, rough shapes that were all gray blocks that kind of made the overall shape of the ship, but it didn't let you actually see what it was really looking like. So if there were things flying away in the background or whatever, I couldn't see those details and I didn't know about certain things. It was hard to get every bit of detail, so people were asking me a lot of questions like, does this and this happen? I was like, I don't really know, to be honest, because I couldn't see some of that stuff because they were just gray blocks that were just moving at times. But there was also a lot of finished effects. There was also a lot of practical effects that had, like, the arm for the Xenomorph had like a rod hanging out of it at times or something like that. Facehuggers had wires in the back of them, that kind of thing. And like Rook, you could see all the animatronics and stuff like that. Not just the synthetic animatronics that he has as a character, but the real ones they did to bring the character to life. This early cut was about the same exact length as the final version that we got in theaters. It wasn't really missing anything. There wasn't any extra scenes with Big Chap running around causing havoc or anything like that. From my understanding, they didn't film any of that stuff. It was all meant to be told through exposition, through Rook. And I believe we will see the Big Chap story play out in the... This is just a speculation, but we'll see that play out in the Marvel comic one-shots that are coming in October. And that's what we'll probably see everything about Big Chap, how he woke back up and wrecked shop, essentially. And maybe that Ripley cameo that you may have heard about. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the video. And my understanding is that my friends at Legacy Effects told me that they only built that crucified Big Chap that's dead up in the rafters, essentially. They didn't build one that was meant to move around and do puppetry and stuff like that. It was just the dead body that we see in that scene where Rook is explaining what went down. And people were also wondering if the rough cut or early version was more gory or bloodier or anything like that. No, it was close to, if not the exact same as what we got in the theatrical version. People are assuming that Fede was more restrained because with Evil Dead, he was a lot more gory, bloody, and all that kind of stuff. But that franchise has always been that way. The Evil Dead films were always gory and extra violent and over the top. And Alien has kind of had those gory moments here and there, but they're usually a lot more reserved, even though like Covenant, Resurrection, and even Alien 3 at times have a lot of just bloody moments. The first two films, there's not a lot of blood. I mean, there is here and there, but it's not visceral and blood raining from the sky levels of Evil Dead kind of stuff right there. So there wasn't anything that I would say would warrant an extended cut of this film that has a whole bunch more scenes or anything like that. There really wasn't anything taken out except for some changes at the end and maybe a line or two here or there, and then one alternate kind of scene as well. And I'll talk about all that later on in this video. But there won't likely be, and I could be wrong. I don't know what Fox has planned for this home release of this film or anything like that, but I can't see there being like an extended version of this film. Maybe some of the alternate scenes that were cut to replace what actually happens in the film, but there's probably not going to be some 3-hour director's cut or anything like that. It is probably just going to be what we got in theaters, and then maybe some behind-the-scenes stuff that we've maybe already seen online too. One of the main things that was different at the very beginning of the movie, though, was the title Fade In. It did not say Alien Romulus. It actually said Alien XX121, which is a very, very specific callback to what they call the Xenomorph in the extended universe. And I was not sure if that was what they were going to call the movie until I saw the final release, and it was indeed Romulus. All the file names and everything were Romulus, but that was a nice little surprise, but it's just something they didn't stick with. But they do call the Xenomorph XX121 during Rook's explanation of how they found Big Chap. And like I said, I didn't attend any test screenings, but I have read that there were some test screenings, or at least one test screening that had, instead of Rook being there, it was Mother, the station's Mother system, was the antagonist. I'm not sure of the validity of that. That was something I recently just read, and it was the first I'd heard of it. But in my version from November 2023, the timestamp was November 2023. It had Rook in it, and it was the puppet version of it. There was no CGI enhancements yet on that, and there was no mother interacting with this crew or anything like that. So I'm not sure if there was a version that they put out just in case they tested a non-Rook version with a Rook version. I'm not sure to see if there was like any reactions viscerally to Ian Holm being brought back from the dead. It was something I'm not entirely sure on. Maybe that was the rumored Phoebe Waller-Bridge character that maybe she did record stuff for it, but then ultimately got cut. I don't know. It's very interesting. I don't know if it would have made the film better or if it wouldn't have helped. I saw the movie way long ago, and I'm still grasping with the whole, do I like Ian Holm being back, or do I have an issue with this? I'm still quite undecided. The version in the rough cut definitely needed the CGI enhancements, because the moment that character started talking, it was like, oh no. And it was just like, rat, 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 rat. Like the head just was like definitely a hand in the mouth Muppet, kind of like Elmo at times talking, and its eyes were not working properly. And I had found out that the intention all along was to do this practical body, but enhanced with the CGI deep fake or whatever they used. And so did they succeed in that? I'm kind of iffy on the effect of Rook. I get it, but I don't know if the character needed to be there. I understand the logic behind it all, but I just don't know if it helped. He was a very expository character. He gave out just a lot of information and told people what to do and this and that and what was going down. But I don't know if I'd call it fan servicey, but it was very jarring every time he popped up. And even as the puppet was there, it felt like the moment that character showed up, the tone of the film shifted for me. And I was very curious to see how it would look in the final cut. And that reveal was also jarring, because I expected better, I think. And I think at times the CGI on the face is incredible, and then at times it was just not right. Looked a little off. And it's hard to explain without being able to show you the performance of the puppet without the CGI enhancement. But I think many would agree with me, and it's not a situation where, like in Alien 3, they brought Bishop back and he was all destroyed pretty much, and his eye was like hanging out and stuff like that, and that performance was great. But it kind of got back to the levels of that Ian Holm in the Alien, where his face got stuck smiling. It was just like oh, okay. And it's not something where they can cut away fast. It was like, oh, his mouth and stuff can't perform. So yeah, it needed it. And maybe one day we'll see some behind the scenes of that more, because Fede has shown like a photo of it, but I wish people could see the Elmo-ness of the talking puppet that was before the CGI enhancements. And the ethics of it all, I'm still like, I get it. I understand if you don't like it and if you think it's ghoulish, but there's a part of me that also understands that Ian Holm wanted to be back in the franchise. He wanted to be acting, but in his final years, he was kind of shunned out of Hollywood. So his family was happy to do this and kind of brought his legacy back a little bit. So I understand what Fede was thinking with it, but I don't know if I'm still on board with it. It's a weird thing. It's going to be one of those things that every time I watch this movie, it's going to not take me out, but it's going to make me think about a bunch of things. And sometimes I don't need that distraction while watching a film. But I'm curious what it would have been like with a mother situation instead of Rook, or maybe if it was a synthetic there, maybe they cast somebody else like Lance Henriksen or Phoebe Waller-Bridge and something like, just do something different. I think that might have worked a little bit better, because the callback was just a little maybe too much. I don't know. I'm still torn on it, and I've been torn on it for like a year now. It's interesting, but originally it was all puppet, and it was puppet with the intention of a CGI face. So it's a hybridization. So it's not completely, the whole thing's not brought to life by AI or anything like that. And Daniel Betts had already recorded the voice, and I thought he had done a great impression of Ian Holm. While not perfectly sounding like him, it did sound like him a lot. And then I think they enhanced it a little bit more in post since the final cut. and it sounded even better in the final version, in my opinion. It felt like there was a lot of temporary sound effects too, which is obviously a thing when it's such an early version, but I felt like I was hearing a lot of the same exact Xenomorph sound effects, or the way the egg sound opens up. That happened a few times. It did just feel like they were pasting sounds for the time being just to have the sound effect, which makes sense. Some of the scenes that had extra CGI elements didn't have those elements at times. So there was that scene where Andy is knocked over in the hive and a Xenomorph walks up and stands over him, and then there's a bunch of facehuggers around him. In that scene, it was basically a JPEG of the Xenomorph, and it got just a little bigger and bigger to imply that it was stepping closer. And I unless it's just that the file quality was so low, I couldn't even see little facehuggers around him at the time. And so stuff like that was just slightly different here and there. So it was kind of like a treat seeing the final version, because it was like, oh, this is still new to me, even though I had seen the movie already. It was cool to see it in steps, essentially. And it's like, I'm almost still like, it's still a surprise to me seeing it in the final version, because I watched the early version a couple of times. Scenes like Andy and Rain in the little mess hall where they were eating breakfast at the beginning of the film or whatever, and Andy was making that seafood joke, there was nobody in the background. Those were all digitally added. I think they're obviously real performances, but they were post-production added in there because they were not in the version that I saw. It was just Rain and Andy in that room talking. So I thought they were in some like apartment building, but no, they were in a mess hall. During the takeoff of the Corbellin, I believe there was a scene where Navarro gets a call through her little radio, and it says that they don't have permission to leave the planet and to ground immediately. But she then shuts off the radio and goes on their way. I think someone said, "Is everything all right?" And she said, "Yeah," or something like that. But that I don't believe was in the final version of the film. When they see the sun for the first time, or Rain does, that's a moment where they played the Prometheus theme. And it in the moment I was like, oh, okay. But then it also kind of worked. But we know now that that's not how it played out in the final version of the film. So one of the scenes that played out a little bit differently than what we saw in the final version was Bjorn's death. So like right after Bjorn and Kay reunite in front of the cocoon, essentially in that hallway, Bjorn shocks the Xenomorph, revealing that this is now our Scorched Xenomorph later on in the film. He doesn't have that moment where he like looks up and sees the tail sticking out like that. I think he does see the tail sticking out, but he then walks away to meet Kay at the door. It's like a long shot down the hallway. You see the cocoon up on the wall, and Bjorn walks towards the camera, and I think Kay is like over on the side here. All of a sudden, Bjorn is then stabbed through the shoulder or the back or the stomach or something like that, and pulled back towards the cocoon pod. And then that's when he's dropped down below the pod itself, and all the acid starts falling on him, and it goes back to what we see in the theatrical version. So it's a slightly different scene. Instead of him getting stabbed in the face and falling down and all the acid on him and things like that, it's something they filmed in the moment. They filmed 2 alternate takes, maybe a few more possibly. But yeah, the version that I saw first had him getting pulled back towards the pod. But I think it was a little maybe too repetitive to how like Tyler, when he gets stabbed, he gets pulled up into the hive a little bit. And another detail that I didn't see in this version of the film, the early version, which is probably because it was a CGI effect, was the inside of the Scorched Xenomorph's dome, there was little bits of electricity that went down. You could see it zapping here and there every once in a while. Really awesome effect in the final version. I did not see that at all in the early cut. And I really liked that little bit of characteristic that they gave to the Xenomorph. I added a little bit more life and just gave him individuality. But something that was different that caught me off guard in the final cut, because most of everything was the same except for the Bjorn scene so far with his death, was when Andy drops down with the pulse rifle in the elevator shaft and says, "Get away from her, you bitch." That line was not in the early cut that I saw, and was quite a surprise when it was spoken out loud, and then all of a sudden the crowds around me started cheering, and I was like, oh no. That for me was not, I did not like that line myself, did not need it in this movie, and was very surprised by it because, like I said, it was not in the early versions of the film. He just, I believe, shoots Scorched. I can't remember if he said anything, but I don't remember him saying, "Get away from her, you bitch." And that could have been a reshoot. It could have just been an additional shot they had on the original production. Could have been a producer note. It's hard to say. It could have been studio note, all that kind of stuff. I don't know where it came from, but I did not need that callback. And that was one of the changes that I did not enjoy. It was just too much for me on that one, but it didn't ruin the entire movie for me. So then the final stuff, this is where it gets to be a little different, and they change some things pretty dramatically in some spots. So with the Offspring, it's all the same. We get the same really tall, lanky guy played by the basketball player Robert Bob Roxy. I'm not sure I pronounce his name correctly, but very tall man in that practical, fleshy creature outfit, and just such an impressive effect. So again, this early CGI, but a lot of the bendy tongue thing, it looked like I could tell what they were going for with it, and it wasn't final, but it was close to a good look at it, and it was all bendy and everything like that. But there were some changes that physically went on with the Offspring as he was crawling around and chasing after Rain and stuff. You would see his body start to contort in different ways, and his shoulders were changing and growing. The back of his head started getting longer and longer and longer. Tubes started forming more, and he just started to look a little bit more like Xenomorph shaped with this engineer face situation going on. It wasn't something I noticed on my first viewing because the quality was just so, I've mentioned it a few times. But on my later viewings, I was like, oh, whoa, he's going through a physical transformation. And I think we see a little bit of that in the final version where we see his tail kind of grow out of him when you first see him revealed eating on Kay, I believe it is. Like the breastfeeding situation is what you want to call it. But he, in his chase with Rain, is when you really start to see his body growing and changing into this other form. And in this chase, it goes by so fast in the final version, but I very explicitly remember a shot of Rain like putting her hand up or something similar, and we see some of her fingers get cut off, or I think it's her ring finger and her pinky finger on one of her hands, and we see her pull her hand up and look at it in horror and shock. But I don't believe that went down in the film. That could be something I imagined, though. It's been so long since I've seen it, but that's what I had written in my notes. She has that moment, and then it gets to the point where she does the acid with the egg and everything, and it sucks them down into space like we saw in the final version. But instead of her floating there and it just jumps at her face and starts doing the secondary tongue and cracking the glass, it was basically just a camera pan over, and we see some fog clear out, and we see its face, but we see that the edges of the face are all, the skin is all ripped and everything like that. And then there's more of the body revealed, and then basically the skin, the white engineer creepy skin, falls off, and the face kind of falls off as well, and it's revealed to be a xenomorph. The Offspring was going to turn into a full-grown adult xenomorph for some reason, and I am very glad they didn't go down that route with the Offspring. I know that the Offspring itself was going to be divisive, but I think if they would have gone the route of it turning into a xenomorph, it would have been even more divisive and just confusing. As a longtime fan, I was confused of why that happened. I didn't like it either. The visual was, I could see what they were going for. That was all really rough CGI too, but it just didn't work for me. And I'm glad they pulled back a little bit and just had it be the big weird creature we got instead of it transforming into a xenomorph. And that was pretty much the biggest change that was like, oh, thank God they changed that. But everything else, the rest of the movie was pretty much the same. There was one scene after the Rain signing off line. I believe that line hadn't been recorded yet or added into it yet, but we saw Andy be put into the cryo sleep pod, and Rain does the same thing. And then I saw gray blocks fly away, but it goes to black, and then it fades back from black to the cryopods again, and one of them is open, and we see like the sweat or whatever that's coming from her. But we see Rain sitting in the pilot cockpit situation of the Corbellin, and the Prometheus theme starts to play, and the sun blasts through. And so we see that Rain is seeing the sunrise, this new system, this new planet. So she had made the 9-year journey, but that was completely cut out of the film too. But right after that, we get the big cut to black, and then it goes Alien. It says XX121 again. And then the credits kick in, and then this was really funny and like, what the heck kind of moment. And the credits kick in, and the first thing it says is Michael Fassbender. And I was like, what did I miss? Quickly realizing when it said Catherine Waterston that this was the temporary credits for Alien Covenant, and they were playing the Gods in Valhalla song that David was playing at the end of Covenant. And yeah, so they were just using temporary Alien Covenant credits, and there was no Michael Fassbender or David in this film. And I was very surprised by that at first, but then it made sense. So that's really it. Like I said, there wasn't some serious like rearrangements of the film or anything like that. There was pretty much all the same, except for Bjorn's death playing out slightly differently, the "get away from her, you bitch" line being added, and the Offspring turning into a Xenomorph. There might be a few minor things here or there that I just can't remember or didn't pick up on, but those were the dramatic changes, along with the temporary music, special effects, and all that kind of stuff that obviously was going to change, along with the face on Rook kind of thing. And then along with that, there was the now revelation that Ripley is in the movie, or maybe her, because in the final version we see the Narcissus fly away, and I thought that was going to be the Corbellan from not having the final version of the film when I was seeing the early cuts. So I didn't realize that ship, I thought that was our main cast just getting into an escape ship or something like that. But no, it's been said that there's potentially a Ripley cameo with her flying away, and then in the background when Kay is being stalked by the Scorched and Andy is not opening the door, we see down the hall the Narcissus docked in a window. That's what I'm not a fan of, but I'm glad it's not super consequential to the plot of the film or anything like that. But those were details that I just didn't see in the early version of the film. But from the version that I saw, that was it. And so, like I said, I wouldn't expect much of an alternate cut or a director's cut or extended version or anything like that. But I could be wrong. I don't know what the home release plan is for this film. But I expect we'll hear more about that in the coming months, like the October or November timeline, probably before Christmas, I'm assuming. But I don't know. I'm not sure. I do know that the movie has a 100-day theatrical window for this one. Fox has been doing that with their releases. But yeah, so we'll find out all together if they do add any of that stuff on the home release in a few months. But for now, that's all I've got. I can finally share all that with you. What do you think of all those changes? What would you have thought if you had seen the Offspring turn into a Xenomorph? I don't know if you would have liked it, because it was just didn't make any sense. So yeah, let me know if you have any more questions on the film, and let me know your opinion on some of those changes. I'm very curious to hear what you think about them. And be sure to keep following Mike's Monsters for more Alien Romulus coverage, especially once that NECA figure comes out with the accessory set. I'm going to be doing a lot of fun photography on those and making a review video and all that fun stuff. And follow along with me on social media to see behind the scenes of my photography, when I share news about movies here and there, when I find out about it, and then just me posting pictures of my life here and there, because sometimes I do that. Thank you so much for watching all my Alien Romulus videos, and I thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate having you here, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye!
Still don't understand what you're dealing with, do you? Perfect organism. Its structural perfection is matched only by its hostility.